Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Be Ultimate podcast. This is Travis Elliott, and thank you for tuning in. This podcast episode, we will be discussing the ancient modality of Ayurvedic medicine. So, have you ever been watching TV and one of those drug pharmaceutical commercials comes up and they start rattling off all the various side effects? This may cause diarrhea. This may cause insomnia. This may cause suicidal thoughts. This may cause cancer. This may cause death. And you're like, this is madness. Why would anybody in the world put this drug, this chemical into their body that could trigger all these horrific side effects? And you're like, something's not right here. This should be illegal. Also, have you ever been to see the doctor and maybe you had to wait an hour and finally the nurse brings you into the doctor's office and the doctor comes in to see you, you tell them your issue, they give you a drug, they send you on the way, and that also didn't feel right. Something felt like it was missing and it was sterile. And sometimes the doctors and the nurses, they're not the healthiest people in the world. And you're going to get better. I remember a time back in my early 20s, I was having a really bad asthma attack and I went to see this doctor in an emergency clinic. And I swear to you, this guy, he was wheezing and breathing with greater difficulty than I was. He was obese, he was overweight, and I did not feel inspired when I left that emergency clinic. So unfortunately, the way that we look at health in the West is lacking. And there's a lot of room for improvement. You know, even the definition of health in the Western medicine model is the absence of disease. Now, in Eastern medicine, it's really a whole different perspective. To them, health is vitality throughout all the systems. Now, I don't know about you, but I resonate and feel greater alignment with that Eastern medicine definition of the fullness of vitality. Because for me, life isn't about just surviving and just barely getting by. It's about thriving. And I want as much energy and health as possible. Now, I don't want to fully knock Western medicine because I have a lot of students that are doctors and nurses, and they do an incredible, excellent job for their students, or I should say patients. And their patients, they're lucky to have them. There's a lot of great doctors out there now that are recommending yoga, meditation. They're even thinking about food and different ways of using food as medicine. But also the reality, if we really look at things as they are, there's also a lot of doctors that are clearly stuck in this old paradigm where in their training, there's barely any emphasis on nutrition and food as medicine. And there's also a lack of the important mind-body connection, even though we know that 95% of disease is caused by stress. So my feeling is that there's a middle path between the Western medicine and the Eastern medicine and what they both have to offer, and that this is really the future of medicine. And we see this now within modalities like functional medicine. But on this episode of the podcast, I want to hone in to Ayurvedic medicine. And Ayurveda is one of these things that's so rich with concepts and history and paradigms. We could spend decades and decades and decades going over Ayurveda, but it's my hope in this podcast that I'll give you some of the fundamentals and the basics of Ayurveda, and this will hopefully inspire you to want to learn more. And also, I want to present this material to you in a way that actually makes sense, that ultimately these teachings, they have to be adapted to the cultures that we live in. Otherwise, it's just not going to resonate with us. So let's start off with first what Ayurveda actually means. Ayurveda means the science of life. Now, if you take a moment and pause and reflect upon that definition, the science of life, well, then that means that this is something that is really relatable to everything that I do as a human being. Now, Ayurveda comes from India, and it's the sister science of yoga. So whether you practice yoga or not, there's definitely a connection and a relationship between yoga and Ayurveda as we know it. Ayurveda medicine really is a traditional healing system of yoga that views the human being as an interplay of body, mind, and spirit. And if you've heard some of the other episodes of the Be Ultimate podcast, especially the one where we talk about the 6 dimensions, then you know that this is a way that I look at who we are as a human being. We're not just the body. We have all these different layers and facets of who we really are. And Ayurveda recognizes that, and it uses all these different treatment protocols and lifestyle techniques that we'll get into as a way of creating harmony within who we are as a human being. Its purpose is really to heal and maintain quality and longevity of life. According to Ayurveda, everyone is unique, and therefore treatment should really be customized to each individual. So it's the opposite of a one-size-fits-all approach, which I think is really, really important. Because you hear out there, everybody should go paleo, everybody should go vegan, everybody should stop eating fat. Now people are saying you should be eating more fat, and you should go raw, and this and that, and we're just bombarded by all these different perspectives as to how to eat, how to diet, and it's overwhelming. And what I love about Ayurveda is that it says, hey, everybody's different. Everybody has different genetics, everybody has different anatomy, everybody has different things that they move through in life, everybody has different things that they're currently moving through life, and we're all born with a unique constitution. Therefore, doesn't it make sense to treat each person in a way that's customized to them as opposed to making them fit into this rigid mentality of a box? Sebastian Pohl, one of the great Ayurvedic practitioners, says, from its ancient origins in India, Ayurveda is now spread all over the world. Its teaching uses a blend of herbal medicine, massage, nutrition, spiritual insight, practical experience, scientific analysis, and artistic creativity to guide us to a balanced, fulfilled lifestyle. If you're looking for greater balance, if you're looking for greater fulfillment, if you're looking for a higher quality of life, Ayurveda has all the answers. My first experience with Ayurveda was probably about 15 years ago, and I found a student clinic where they practice Ayurveda. I showed up to receive this Ayurvedic treatment. I had no idea what I was getting into. This was brand new. But I had been doing yoga for a couple of years and heard about this word Ayurveda, and to me it had a lot of mystique. I was attracted to it, but at the same time I had no idea what was going on there. So I went to this Ayurvedic clinic, and there was a teacher and 3 students. And the first thing they did was they had me sit down and they asked me a zillion questions. They asked me what my energy level was like, what my sleep was like, what kind of foods that I was eating, what was my sexual activity like, and a lot of it was personal. It was like dealing with Sherlock Holmes. But I would later find out there was definitely a method to the madness. I answered all their questions as honestly and truthful as I could. And then after we finished the question section, then they checked my pulse. They would put 3 fingertips right on top of my radial artery. And each student would feel the pulse, and they would apply all sorts of different pressure. So not only did they have the fingertips on the wrist, but they were pushing into it and going to different levels of the pulse. And as they were doing that, they had this piece of paper with all these diagrams on it, and they were marking different parts of the diagram, circling things and highlighting things and taking all these notes. And it really did look like this science that was going on. And then after they checked the pulse, then they asked me to stick my tongue out. And it's not like we walk around showing our tongue to people, right? Like, that's kind of an awkward personal thing. Like, you know, so you kind of stick your tongue out a little bit, and they're like, no, show me the whole thing. And eventually they have you looking like Gene Simmons of Kiss, where your tongue's like all the way down the chin, and they're all like looking at it. And a little embarrassing, but again, there's a method to the madness. After they finished the questions and the pulse and the tongue, then the teacher came in, and then he did the same thing, and he verified what they had found. And then based off what they had found in this consultation, which probably took about 30 to 40 minutes, way longer than going to a doctor, then they had me begin a whole treatment session. Now, I want you to take a moment, and I want you to think about the best spa experience that you've ever had your entire life. And for me, I've been to spas all over Asia. You go to places like Thailand, they have the best spas in the world. And you can do these spa packages where you're there 2, 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. And they're amazing. Take your best spa experience that you've ever had and multiply that times 1,000, and that's what this treatment was like. They put me on a table, and I had a 4-handed oil bath massage. And even though it was 2 people putting oil on me and doing all these flows, like, their movements were incredibly synchronized, and they had all this way of moving and flowing through the body where it was like a well orchestrated symphony, and just tons of oil just being lathered on, and they had put herbs and essential oil into the base oil, which I think was organic sesame oil, that was purely customized to what they had found out in my pulse and in the questions that I had to answer. And then after an hour of this 4-handed oil bath massage, they took me to receive a eucalyptus steam bath. They put me into this big wood box, and while I was in the oil bath massage, they had been boiling these fresh eucalyptus leaves in the steam box. So by the time I got there, that sucker was like full throttle. And I'm in there and I'm sweating, and now I'm like soaking up all these herbal oils. And they had me in there for about 15 minutes. My whole body was covered except my head. So I was like peering out of this little hole. and just sweating and sweating and sweating, and you could smell the freshness and the aliveness of the eucalyptus leaves. And then after my steam box, they brought me back to where I'd gotten the oil bath massage, and they had me lay on my back. So my face is pointing up towards the ceiling, and they did a treatment called nausea. Now, nausea is where they put a little bit of medicated oil into your nostril, and then you breathe it up into your sinuses, and it clears out your sinuses and what's called the pranavaha shrotas, or the respiratory channels. So I could feel my sinuses opening up, and by this time, like after the massage and the steam bath, like I was in a whole other dimension. I was blissed out. After they did the oil up the nose, then they did a treatment called Shirodhara. And Shirodhara, you may have seen pictures of where somebody's laying on their back and there's a big copper pot above their face, a foot or two, and then there's a stream of oil that comes down to the center of the forehead, the third eye, and then it runs down the skull all the way to the very top of the skull. And so you create this like stream of slightly warm oil that's just continuous, hitting this trigger point, which in Ayurveda is called a marma point, which is similar to an acupressure point. And then it hits all these other energetic points all the way up the scalp to the top of the head. Now, I was already in bliss, but by the time I got to that treatment, like I was in like bliss on steroids. I was out of my body, and I was in a whole other dimension where I was just boundless and spacious and free. And then eventually the Shirodhara treatment finished, and we wrapped up the treatment. And then before I left, the instructor, the teacher, had handed me this big box of herbs, and he said, I want you to take these herbs as a tea, and I want you to drink this 2 to 3 times a day. And he said, by the way, you see that whiteboard over there? Up on that whiteboard is your herbal formula. And there were like 16 herbs that were up there. Weird words like amalaki and harataki and kapi kachu and brahmi and godu kola and ashwagandha, and the list just went on. And then next to each one, he had a number, and that was the ratio of herbs that he had put into this herbal formula that was my medicine, and that medicine was tailored to me. As you can imagine, I was blown away. Like this is what medicine should be. And I know that in our Western medicine model, like doctors can't do this. Like in order for them to survive, like they cannot spend that long with their patients. I get it. But having this experience just showed me how flawed our medical model is. And I was like, this Ayurvedic system is phenomenal, and I need to learn about this. I found out that they were starting an Introduction to Ayurveda course the following week. I signed up for that course because I had experienced it firsthand. And in that course, we were led by the same professor and the same teacher that was the professor at my treatment. And this guy, John Holmstrom, tall guy, slender, probably 6'4", white hair, beard. If you can imagine Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, John Holmstrom was like the Ayurvedic version of Gandalf. This guy was legit. And he had spent years in Ayurveda in India, running these big Ayurveda plantations. And he had a clinic that he would run in the Pacific Palisades where he would do everything. Like, he wasn't one of these Ayurvedic doctors that checks you out and then they send you off to other people and they do all the dirty work. Like, he did everything from A to Z. And in that first class, Introduction to Ayurveda, he had us checking other students' pulse. And I was hooked. And what ended up happening was I did the whole entire 2-year course where I studied Ayurveda. I learned all about it and became a certified Ayurvedic practitioner, all because I had had this amazing experience where I felt like my body and my mind and my heart and my soul got addressed in a treatment. After I graduated and became an Ayurvedic practitioner, I actually opened up an Ayurvedic clinic in Venice, California, across from Whole Foods on Lincoln Boulevard. And I started seeing people. And people would come in with all sorts of health complications and issues that nobody else could help. And I would do what I was trained to do. I would check the pulse, ask questions, look at tongue, prescribe herbs, do bodily treatments. And people got better. Ayurveda was able to help cure people and manage symptoms that no other healing modality had been able to do. But what happened was, at that same time, my career as a yoga instructor was really taking off, and I had to make a decision between being a full-time yoga instructor or being a full-time Ayurvedic practitioner. And I really felt like, although I loved Ayurveda and was passionate about Ayurveda, that my real true path was the path of being a yoga instructor. But even as I left my Ayurvedic practice behind, I still live with these principles of Ayurveda, and I also still teach these principles. Let's talk now about the principles that really make up what Ayurveda is all about. It all starts with what's called the 5 elements. And in Ayurveda, that's known as the Mahabhutas. Maha means great, and Bhuta means element. So the great elements. And in Ayurveda, they believe that the 5 elements are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Ether is another way of saying space. And that these 5 elements, they exist throughout the entire universe. They exist within our body. They exist within this planet. They exist within the stars up in the sky. These 5 elements make up everything. And the origin of the 5 elements is a pretty fascinating story and concept of how these 5 elements came to be. Now, it all started where there was just pure space. So that's the first element, space, or akasha, ether, just pure empty space. And after a lot of time had passed by, what happened is that within this vacuum of space, there became a birth of molecules known as air that began to travel through the space. Now we have the next element of air. And then eventually more of these air molecules were created, and as they became more and more dense within space, eventually these air molecules would bump into each other or rub against each other, and as they rubbed up against each other, it created a type of friction or heat, which then created the element of fire, Agni. Now, if you understand the science of fire, you understand that fire can only get to be so hot before eventually it has to cool down. And when fire cools down, it turns into moisture. And now we have the birth of water, or the element of Jala. And then eventually water begins to harden and crystallize into the final element, the most dense of all the elements, which is the element of earth. This is the creation of the Mahabhutas. And these 5 elements, they exist within all things. So earth is going to be reflective of qualities that are heavy and dense. Fire is going to be reflective of qualities that are hot and penetrating. Water is going to be reflective of qualities that are more fluid and lubricating and moisturizing. Air is going to be reflective of qualities like lightness and movement. And then the last, most subtle of all the elements, the element of space, of ether, is just emptiness and openness. Now, when we understand the 5 elements, the Mahabhutas, then we can take that understanding and we can begin to now understand the next key concept of Ayurvedic medicine, which is called the 3 Doshas. And dosha is another way of saying a constitution or a characteristic. So we take these 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and these are what compose and create the doshas. The first dosha is called Vata dosha, V-A-T-A, Vata. And Vata is made up of the 2 elements of air and ether, spaciousness and lightness. That's Vata. The next dosha is the dosha called Pitta, P-I-T-T-A, Pitta. And Pitta is composed of the elements of mostly fire, but also water. So Pitta is naturally more penetrating, more fiery, more intense. And then the third dosha is called the Kapha dosha, and Kapha is composed of the 2 densest or most gross of the elements. Gross not in like a bad way, but gross in a thick, dense way, and that's the elements of water, but mostly earth. This symbolizes more of those qualities like heaviness and stability and solidity. Now, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha translate into bodily characteristics and also personality characteristics. So you can look at these doshas not just on a physical level, but you can also look at these characteristics on a psychological level. Let's break down first the Vata constitution. So Vata on a physical level are going to be body types that are smaller bones, skinnier, more slender. And then psychologically, Vata, if you remember, is the element of air and ether. There's a lot of movement happening around. So Vatas are the ones that tend to be more creative. They can think out of the box. But when the Vata gets imbalanced, they're the ones that are like not in this world, and they're like, their heads are in the clouds, and you just have to like ground them and center them because they're all over the place. They always want to be traveling. They always want to be moving. They never want to settle down. That's Vata. Pitta physically are going to be people that have more of a medium build, typically more athletic, more muscular. So they are your typical athletes. And then psychologically, Pitta is really, really good with being a leader because they're fiery. So they can use this fire as a way to inspire and to motivate. But when the Pitta gets out of balance, they're the ones that get angry and irritable and hostile. So there's a light side and there's a shadow side to all these constitutions of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. The third dosha, Kapha, physically, they're the ones that are going to be bigger bones. So they have a larger frame. They're typically heavier people. And then psychologically, a Kapha person, because they're more earth and water, so heavier, they have a tendency to get stuck and stagnant and comfortable and attached to things. Hopefully that provides you a beginning view of the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha characteristics. And it's a little more complicated than it sounds. But again, I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. But just so you know, you could physically be one constitution, one dosha. And then psychologically, you could be another constitution. For example, maybe you're a Pitta type, so you're athletic physically, you're muscular, you're in good shape, but psychologically you're more of a Vata, and your mind is all over the place. You can't ever quiet the mind down. You never stick to one thing. You're always multitasking. You're very creative. You're very artistic. And that's an example of somebody who physically is Pitta, but mentally is Vata. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, how do you find out what your dosha is? Because you're probably wondering, all right, Travis, this sounds really cool and makes a lot of sense. This is all based off the very laws of nature. I'm with you. But how do I find out my dosha? Well, the easy answer to that is go to Mr. Google. Go to Mr. Google and type up Dosha Questionnaire, or how do I find out my dosha, and you will find no shortage of dosha questionnaires. I personally like a website called Banyan Botanicals. Banyan Botanicals. I'll link it into the blog show notes, and if you're interested, you can go check them out. But they do a dosha questionnaire, but again, you can go to anywhere you want on the internet and figure out what your dosha is. Also, keep this in mind. We are all a combination of all the elements. So we all have earth, water, fire, air, and ether within our body. The earth manifests within our tissues, within our bones. Water, obviously, we're made of about 75% water. All the fluids in the body, your blood, your lymph, this is all water. Tears that come out of the eyes. And then fire. Fire is reflective in the body within digestion and also assimilating the things that we bring into our body. The fire of the senses, it takes fire to process all the data that's coming in through the senses. And then air, breath, right? So we're breathing in and out of our lungs. We see air there. There's nerves that have to travel all throughout the body. What moves the nerves throughout the body? Air. Your nerves are moving with the winds of air. And then spaciousness. Spaciousness, we know that we are actually 99.99% space, especially when we look at it from the framework of a subatomic model. We're mostly space, and there's space all throughout our body. So you can see how those 5 elements translate into the body. So you find out your dosha, you do it through a questionnaire. Or the best way to find out is to go to an Ayurvedic practitioner and to get your pulse read. And they'll be able to tell all the things that are going on. What I learned from pulse diagnosis is that there's 7 different levels of the pulse, and each level of the pulse is connected to what's called a nadi, or a channel of energy that's connected to different things like the elements, the organs, the tissues, and even the chakras, the energy centers. And then lastly, the third way to find out what your dosha is by looking at the tongue. So as I mentioned, when I went to go see the students at the Ayurvedic clinic and they were studying my Gene Simmons tongue, they could tell if there was a coating on the tongue. And most of us do have a coating. And what color is that coating? Because if the coating is a yellowish color, then that's going to be a sign that there's Pitta. If the tongue has a really red tip, that's another sign that there's Pitta, that there might be inflammation. What's the size of the tongue? If the tongue is medium, then that's Pitta. If it's more slender and long, then that's Vata. And if it's shorter and thicker and fatter, then that's a sign of Kapha. And the idea is that if all the questions and the pulse and the tongue all point to the same thing, then you've triple checked that you know what that person's dosha constitution is. And then once you figure that out, then you know how to proceed forward with the herbs that you give, the diet that you recommend, the type of treatments that you recommend, lifestyle, what time to go to bed, what time to wake up, so that you're harmonizing yourself with the natural rhythms of nature that are applicable to you and your specific constitution. Super cool, right? Now, the last thing that I want to talk about, because this This is real powerful stuff. And I think that this will change the way that you look at nutrition and the way that you look at digestion. So hang in there with me. I know I'm throwing a lot of material at you. You can always go back and listen to the podcast again, or you can go to our blog and it's all written out. You can study it as much as you want. The last model that I want to present to you is about Ayurveda nutrition. And this is based off of the 7 dhatus. Dhatu means tissue. In Ayurveda, we are made of these 7 different tissues. What are those tissues, Travis? Those tissues are 1, rasa, which is lymph, rakta, which is blood, mamsa, which is skin and muscle, medus, which is fat, ashti, which is bone, maja, which is nerve and the brain, and then lastly, number 7 is shukra, which is the reproductive tissue. These are the 7 tissues. Now let's talk about what happens when you put food into your body, which we can all relate to. You're going to eat a meal, maybe you just ate a meal, or you're going to eat a meal later today. This is what happens. You put this food into your body, and maybe you drink some beverages, and all this stuff goes down into your stomach, and your stomach begins to fire up the agni, the digestive fires. It begins to secrete acids, and it begins to secrete these chemicals to break down the food that you've put into your body. As you can imagine, that takes quite a bit of energy. So the body breaks down all that food that you put into your body, and what it has to do is it has to break it down into what's called a food soup. And this food soup in Ayurveda is called chayal. Not child, but chayal. And chayal is this food soup. And the idea is that this food soup, now that it's broken down into all these vitamins and minerals, is now going to go on a journey through all those 7 tissues of the body. So now it goes on the journey, and it starts off with the lymph. And it's going to spend 5 days in each one of the tissues. So it'll spend 5 days in lymph, 5 days in blood, 5 days in muscle, 5 days in fat, 5 days in bone, 5 days in nerve, and then 5 days in the reproductive tissue, bringing the minerals and the vitamins and the nutrition to feed the cells in those tissues, because your cells are like little people and they need to eat and they need to excrete. They need to eat, they need to excrete. It's the circulation that's the key to life and longevity. So what happens if you go eat later today and you eat a bunch of shitty junk food, French fries, hamburgers, bread, gluten, fried foods, processed foods? Well, that food goes into your stomach. It gets broken down into a food soup. Do you think that there's going to be a lot of minerals and vitamins in that food soup? No, of course not. There's not going to be a lot of vitamins and minerals. Maybe there's a little tiny bit, and so you feed your first tissue, the lymph, a little bit. So that's worst case scenario, worst case eating. But I'm hoping you guys are listening, that you're good eaters, and maybe sometimes you eat well and sometimes you don't eat well. So let's look at that scenario. You know, you like to, eat a fun meal, and you like to eat your pizza and your French fries and your hamburgers and whatever it is, and you're not always organic, and sometimes you eat your sugar, but also you understand that you should be eating good food. So you're back and forth. You're like a middle road person. So you're putting that food into your body, you're breaking it down into the chayal, you're breaking that down into the food soup, and you got a decent amount of vitamins and minerals. So you're able to nourish your lymph, and then 5 days later you nourish the blood. Blood's pretty good. And then 5 days later you get to the muscle, and you're able to feed the muscles. You're eating plenty of protein. And then you get to the fat. You're able to feed the fat. And those 4 tissues have been well supplied, but around the fat tissue, you begin to run out of good vitamins and minerals in your chayal. So what happens? Well, what happens is now your bone and your nerve, your brain, and your reproductive tissue, they don't get any love. Those cells in those deeper tissues, because your diet and nutrition isn't strong and consistent, they begin to deteriorate. And this is how you get things like osteoporosis. The bone tissue isn't being fed, so there's these little micro holes that begin to form in the bones. This is how you get brain and nerve disorders like Alzheimer's, because the nerve tissue isn't being fed properly. And then this is how you have fertility issues, because people's reproductive tissue is not being fed properly. It's not being nutrified. Now, when your reproductive tissue is healthy, all the other tissues will be healthy. Your reproductive tissue is the source of all the tissues. The idea is we want to be consistent within our nutrition. We want to be eating good quality, high energetic food, good quality water as much as possible, so that the child is constantly going through all those tissues. And we also want to make sure that our elimination is top notch as well, because if you're not eliminating, guess what happens? You create this undigested food material in Ayurveda called ama, A-M-A. And when the ama, this sticky, nasty, putrid material, is not getting eliminated through detoxification, that ama gets recirculated and recycled through those 7 tissues over and over again. And now you have toxins going through those cells and those tissues, and this is the cause of a lot of disease. Now, in Western medicine, we expect a quick fix. Give me a drug and I'm going to be well. But hear this. If you want to change the fruits, you got to start by changing the roots. Now, it takes time. It takes time to get the fruits to be healthy. But you start by making sure that the soil of the tree is high quality soil, and then all the vitamins and minerals will go through the roots, up the trunk, out the branches, through the leaves, and create good quality fruits. But it takes time. As it says in the Tao Te Ching, nature never hurries, yet everything is accomplished. And it's the same within your body. So if you have bad food habits and you have bad lifestyle habits and you're out of balance, that's okay. You got to start somewhere, and you want to give yourself time. In order to get through all those 7 tissues, it takes 35 days, because there's 7 tissues and the child spends 5 days in each one of those tissues. So that's where you get 35 days. When you decide to start a new regimen or a new eating plan, you want to do it in terms of thinking, all right, I'm going to commit to this for 35 days, so that you really get all that good nutrition all the way down into the reproductive tissue. My challenge to you is start today, start tomorrow, figure out a time to start where you're eating good quality food and you're cutting out the bad stuff, sugar and mostly gluten and anything that's processed and has preservatives and is not fresh and is not a whole food. Cut that stuff out of your life so that these 7 tissues can be healthy and that you can find a greater quality of life. So as a wrap up, here's your task. Explore the Dosha Questionnaire. Go to Mr. Google or go to Banyan Botanicals. 2, strive to balance yourself out. If you're a Pitta person and you're fiery, you got to cool yourself down. Coconut water, aloe vera juice, watermelon. Stay away from the spicy food and the stimulating food. And I know you Pittas, I know that's what you love, but what you love ain't so good for you. You got to cool yourself out, baby. Cool it out. And you Vatas out there, you want to balance yourself out by eating warm, nutritious, heavier meals. And a lot of the Vatas out there, they're the ones that are going raw and they're all about the raw food and they're just aggravating their Vata. And then you Kaphas out there, you got to scale back on the quantity of the food and you got to move away from the heavy foods and you got to eat lighter and you'll find your balance. And then to harmonize yourself with the rhythms of nature, go to bed earlier. Wake up when the sun is rising. Be present to these cycles of nature because the cycles of nature also exist within you. Now, we also have great Ayurveda practices on our platform, Interdimension TV. I have practices for spring, summer, fall, and winter. And you can practice in a yoga setting in a way that's going to be great for the season that you're in, because as the seasons change, that's going to affect the 5 elements within your body. And then if you're interested in learning more about this, I do Ayurvedic trainings, 30 hours, typically 3 days, 10 hours a day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And my next one coming up is June 28th through the 30th, 2019 in Clovis, California. We'll link up in the show notes to that if you're interested. We go deep into Ayurveda. And then there's a lot of great books out there on this subject of Ayurveda. Check out Vasant Lad. Again, this will be on the blog. David Frawley and Maya Tiwari. And then Banya Botanicals is also a great resource. I hope you guys found this helpful. I know it's a lot of information. I know we went a little bit longer, but I really wanted to give you a good, solid understanding as to what this stuff is about. And then now you can take it from there. So let's finish with the ultimate prayer. May we bring strength where there is weakness. May we bring courage where there is fear. May we bring compassion where there is suffering. And may we bring light where there is darkness. May we be ultimate.